Hi there. This is John Fairhurst with my review of the Magazine Wars, The Wonder Wars by Hal Kovac. As you might have gathered from that rather frightening X in the title, this is part of a larger series of books that detail the ongoing conflicts between mankind and the Kazin. The idea of the series as a whole came from the short story Angel's Pencil by Larry Niven, hence his co-author credit here. Most of the other books in this universe are anthologies with little in common between stories. While technically this could be described as military science fiction, as there is plenty of combat in it, much of the focus of the stories relate to the interactions between the humans of Wonderland and the Kazin invaders. The book itself is from Baen Books and was published in 2003 with a cover by Stephen Hickman. To begin with, though, let's take a brief look at the background to the stories in the collection. The overarching background is Larry Niven's known space universe, where Earth had come under the control of the UN and the ARM, that's the Amalgamated Regional Militias, essentially the world's combined military, and had pretty much banished war under what is a pretty oppressive regime, controlling technologies that could lead to open and not so open war, which, if you think about it, is pretty much all technology when you come right down to it. The Wonderlanders, among other things, set up their colony to be so as far out of the range of armed control as possible with the sublight technology of the day. But even so, they are a relatively peaceful colony. On the other hand, the Kazin are anything but peaceful, and a bit like the Klingons from Star Trek, the best thing a Kazin could have is a death in battle. The next best thing is to earn a name and mates. The Kazin were originally found by the Chakotay, while in the equivalent of their Iron Age and genetically modified to act as bodyguards for the Chakotay before they rebelled and enslaved their former masters. Then going on to enslave as many other species as they could reach, everything in their path until they found the Monkeys of Terror and Wonderland, that is. And while the former were able to fight off the invaders, Wonderland was far too underdeveloped and unprepared to hold out for long. The Kzinti themselves are tigroid in form, that is to say, they are basically bipedal felinoids that are coloured similarly to Terran tigers, though they can also very successfully hunt on four legs as well. Seeing as we've mentioned the Klingons, let's have a bonus question here. Did the Kzinti ever appear in a Star Trek series? Answers at the end of the video. Onto the book. The first section of the book deals with the invasion and from the point of view from Niels Rickerman, who's a biology professor at Neumünchen University. The threat of the Kzinti is presented as a potential problem with details from the Angel's Pencil showing what they could be up against. Reichman is rather more worried about the rather grainy pictures. They've been on their way for almost a decade by this point, for they bore an uncanny resemblance to sightings he'd been investigating at the nearby monastery. But his concerns are buried under the details of resurrecting a martial tradition buried under centuries of neglect. As the mayor of München calls together a committee of the great and good of Wonderland to determine how to defend their world from the threat most of them still thought was still impending. Nils' friend Dmitri is a highly intelligent mathematical whiz, and had already worked out that this was basically a load of rubbish, though not being fully in the picture. She didn't know about the imminent invasion. As the chair of biology and zoology at München University, Reicherman had been called in to visit the local monastery, where some of the brothers had encountered an unclassified creature. Not that surprising on a planet where that even a few hundred years' exploration had barely scratched the surface of. The brothers were adamant that the creature didn't fit into the taxonomy as they understood it. Unfortunately, Reichman was as much in the dark as they were at this point. So after a few hours hiking around the area and finding nothing except for some scuffed up grassland, Reichenmann has to call it a day. And it's after this that he gets called into the mayor's gets called onto the mayor's council and its various committees. To be honest, this is probably the weakest part of the whole book. So while I struggled to get through the politicking, it was worth it as the action began to heat up. Dimitri isn't involved in these discussions, but like you say, she's super intelligent. And as Niels and his colleagues argue about the meaning of ancient texts and warfare, those that had evaded Arm's gentle oversight anyway, she's been noticing and analysing the activity in the local spaceport. She persuades Niels to clue her in on what's been going on. I mean, after all, who's she going to tell? Virtually the only person Dimitri ever spoke to was Niels. As Niels and Dimitri go back to the area around the monastery to see if they could find out anything more, now that they know what they're looking for, all they find is a dearth of local marshmen, though plenty of evidence of what had happened to them. They end up holing up, quite literally for the night, at the field station Reichenmann uses as his HQ in the exploration of the underground ecosystem of the Grossdrak caverns, and it's here that they have their first encounter with living Kzinti. This went surprisingly well for the Terrans. They survived and gained a Kzinti air sled. Back in civilization, things are going to pot as the war in space has been definitively lost by the Wonderlanders. We're then treated to the human's last stand, in which the couple take part with distinction and getting away just before the Kzin changed tactics from Kzinti wave attacks to something more nuclear. In an attempt to stop Dimitri and her brain falling into the hands of the Kzin, they head back to Munchen, where they are running shuttles up to the long-abandoned slow boats back to Terra, and it's here that they suffer their worst casualty when Dimitri suffers a bad head injury. The official slow boats being effectively out of reach, Reichenmann recalls that rather suspiciously shaped tower at the heart of the monastery, and Dimitri is soon on her way to, well, who knows where. She's in an autodock and doesn't care. Reichenmann is heading out to the Grossdrak caverns, where he's about to take up a new career as a resistance fighter. The second story opens decades after the invasion, with the Kzinti firmly embedded into Wonderland and increasingly taking over the open spaces. But the monkeys are still fighting, particularly around the caves of the Grossdrak. In a determined attempt to destroy this locus of resistance, a major Kzinti invasion of the caverns is mounted. By now, the Kzin have vast experience of the dastardly ways of the monkeys from Sol, but they were, well, Kzinti, and caution is still an alien concept. So when platoon officer orders his troops forward, everyone rushes in, except for Corporal, who's been assigned rear guard, leaving him to hear the screams of Kzin in surprised shock. When he cautiously moves forward in turn, he finds a horror show. After asking for a volunteer, and still after this, all his surviving command volunteer, Corporal sent him forward, ordering the Kzin not to keep moving into danger. What was discovered was that these duplicitous monkeys had strung monofilament macrowire across a section of tunnel that would have the Kzin rushing downhill. Maybe Arm's anti-tech laws may have had something going for them after all. Anyway, gradually, Corporal, well, now effectively Sergeant, the Kzin are great believers in the Dead Men's Shoe school of promotion, and what remains of his troops work their way through the tunnels in their sector. But it's not just the pesky Terrans that the Kzin are fighting. The local wildlife decides that both sides are fair game, and they don't particularly care if their targets are dead before attempting to eat them. And gradually this tale evolves into the isolated Kzin and the survivors of the human resistance cell having to cooperate to survive, which comes as a culture shock to both the sergeant and his human foes. Most of the humans manage to get away, though Reichenmann is badly injured and fights back to back with Sargent before they're rescued by another prong of the Kazin invasion. Reichenmann is accorded a rare honour by the Kazin and allowed a special boon by them. He asks that Sargent be allowed to choose a name, that most coveted honour for a Kazin. Okay. The final tale to feature Reichenmann and others from the previous two stories is Music Box. This is set a few years after the liberation of Wonderland, and if you want to read more about that liberation, other stories in the series cover the actual fighting. There should be a generic link to the Man-Kazin books in the description below. This tale, though, is a confused mess. That's obviously my opinion. Dealing with the political manoeuvrings amongst the victorious humans as they deal with the Kazin remaining on Wonderland. Reichenmann is still alive and married to his lab assistant from pre-invasion days. Anti-aging drugs were available on rare occasions for Reichenmann and even rarer occasions for his wife. So they're pretty much of a physical age by now. Also, in the background, there's a delegation from We Made It, where the human implementation of the FTL drive came from, allowing the humans to win this round of the wars against the Kazin. And amongst the We Made It delegations is Dimitri Carmody, late of Wonderland, though she does not remember very much of this time. Anyway, like I say, I found all the political shenanigans messy and confusing. The meeting between Dimitri and Reichenmann was touching thanks to that remnants of that bad injury. The final story is set far into the future, where humans in the Kazin have come to a sort of accommodation, even as they're jockeying for advantage in the next war. In Peter Robinson, a group of humans and a pair of Kazin, one who is from the Patriarchy and the other from Wonderland and seen as a freak, have been called in to investigate the presence of a device that looks like it belonged to the ancient slavers. Extreme caution is required here, as the most dangerous thing that could be found in such a location are revived slavers, beings of terrifying mental powers to compensate for their relative physical lack of strength. What the party thinks is a rogue planet turns out to be a super-sized stasis field containing a series of smaller stasis boxes inside, along with some others that had already been opened. Fearing that the moon is a trap, the party try and run, but they're already too late, and a new set of slaves look like they'll be joining the Thrint. That's the species name for the slavers. Except that the despised Wonderlander Kazin is telepath and is able to resist long enough to launch himself at the big stasis field and destroy it. And it's presumed himself. It's actually quite funny to see how this action makes the others reassess the eponymous Kazin's abilities. And that's it. For the most part, the stories in this collection hang together quite well. And while the final story is the most out of place in terms of story arc, it's the third story, Music Box, that feels most out of place in my opinion. Rather due to the politicking and messing about, rather than having a more action-based plot. Again, as mentioned, the politicking bits of the first story are also a bit of a slog to get through. And in answer to my question on the Kazin and Star Trek, yes, the Kazin did appear in Star Trek. They appeared they appeared in Star Trek, the animated series episode "The Slaver Weapon," and that's it. Okay. As well as links to the book in the description below, there's a link to a list of other books in the Man-Kazin sequence. And as with all such links, I get a small payment from Amazon with no additional cost to you should you choose to buy. And thanks for listening to this review. And if you haven't, like, subscribe and share. Bye. Goodbye.